Welcome to another episode of Fortunate Fishes. I'm sure you've all heard, give a person a fish, you feed him for the day. Teach him to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. And we believe wealth is more than how much money you have in the bank. It's also your intellectual capital, social, human, emotional, and spiritual. And to elucidate all those topics today, we have an amazing guest, Mike Stoltzfus. So let's get to it. Welcome, Mike, to this edition of Fortunate Fishes. So tell us a little bit about your story, how you got started, where you grew up, and how you got started on this great journey of yours.
Charlie, thank you for the opportunity to be with you. You know that I have an immense amount of respect for you and immense extraordinary appreciation for your heart, for your mind, for your energy, for your vision, and for what you're doing for the world, kind of one person at a time through R360. So
thank you.
That's kind of an immense amount of gratitude for you. So I was born and raised in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, which is about 100 miles west of Washington, D.C. Just think of it as rural Virginia in the mountains. And my folks both came from southeast Pennsylvania. They're what we call Pennsylvania Dutch. They're both my mom is of Amish background, and my dad was Mennonite. And so they came to the Shenandoah Valley to go to the local college, and that's why we as a family are here. So I grew up, when my folks moved here in '67 to go to school, they essentially had enough money for their first semester of college, my dad's first semester of college, he and his twin brother, and the first month's rent. And then thus kind of began the entrepreneurial journey that brings us to today. So I grew up in a household where it was hand to mouth for decades. And my dad had a bunch of really wise ways of thinking about business. My mom is extraordinarily competitive, a very strong leader. And so literally growing up, every conversation from as early as I can remember at the dinner table or at the dinner table was all about business. And so I kind of grew up in that.
I see, I hear a little farming in the background and agriculture, but I see a lot of airplanes behind you. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I am third generation aviation. My grandfather bought his first airplane in 1936. He began as a crop duster, and he's what's considered to be, let's see if I have it here. No, I don't have it here. No, here it is. He is considered to be the pioneer. This is a book that was written in the 80s. The pioneer agriculture aviation kind of crop duster of the Northeast United States. Fast forward, he got into government contracting in the 50s, and literally he bought a farm and converted it into a grass strip behind the house. And so my dad and my uncle literally, not figuratively, literally grew up with airplanes in their backyard. So my grandfather owned various fleets of airplanes, and this airplane here is a turboprop Beech 18. I have about 1,500 hours flying turboprop Beech 18.
How old were you when you first learned to fly? 20 years old.
I was the late bloomer. All my cousins, my brother, my dad, my uncle, they all soloed when they were 16. And throughout my kind of from 10 to 20, I just wanted to do business. And then I got bit by the flying bug when I was 20, and that's why I got into
Well, you
business.
got lucky. I wanted to fly fighter planes in the military, so I went to the Air Force Academy, and of course, I tell people if I hadn't been so dumb, I would have been a pilot, because at midnight I would, it was lights out. The engineering and all that stuff came hard to me, so I was with a flashlight under the covers from midnight till 2 a.m, and you do that for a while, and your eyes go from 20/20 to 20/40 to 20/100, And back in those days, they didn't let you do LASIK surgery. You were out. And I could have been a navigator, but it's, just wasn't for me. But, R360 has 15 members that didn't go to college, 9 that didn't graduate from high school. And there's a lot of people that think that to create wealth, you need a lot of fancy degrees. But tell us about your relationship with public schooling.
Yeah. So, suffice it to say, from when I was in the 4th grade, I got like 45 straight A's. And then by the time I was in the 7th grade, I was like a D student. And so there were a bunch of stuff that happened around that time that
knocked you off course.
Yeah. And so, then somewhere in there, middle school, I love to build, right? I love to create, and that really started kind of in the 6th grade. I started farming and various things. And so for all intents and purposes, from middle school through high school, my outlet was all things agriculture. By the time I was, 16, I was farming 50 acres. I had 20 head of cattle, had a bunch of farm equipment.
So who needs to go to college when you're working?
So crazy was when I was 11. When I was 11, I fell in love with tractor trailers, and I decided right then and there, when I'm 18, I'm going to start a trucking business. I'm going to start with my own truck, and then I'm going to build a business. And then from that,
how did you learn the skills? Did you learn from your family or just?
Well, so a lot of this is Pennsylvania Dutch. So it's a Swiss German heritage, and very mechanically minded, very kind of motorheads. But motorhead's not so much in a way that you either operate or that you turn wrenches. It's like you do both. It's like everything to do with something that has an engine. Anyways, so I go through middle school, not good grades, but I'm certainly loving building, right? I'm loving business and loving farming and all this stuff. Same thing with high school. And I had ADHD, didn't know it. And so I barely made it through high school. I was 3rd from the bottom of my class. I kind of say that like a badge of honor, right?
I heard that.
Okay.
All right.
So my dad had one goal while I was in high school, and that was that I would graduate, right? He thought it was very important that I was graduate. And a handful of times where I was like, I'm done, I'm out, right? I don't need any of this. I love to learn, but I got to learn my own way. And so then I took a couple classes at our local community college in the fall, and realized very quickly that was just not for me. I didn't have the patience. Bottom line was I just simply didn't have the patience for a full semester class. I learned a bunch. Really, I apply to this day. I learned stuff that I learned in community college, but that's the story.
So how did you get started on the entrepreneurial venture? And, in R360, we believe wealth is more than money, and we believe in a concept of fishes, where it's not only financial capital, but intellectual and social, human, emotional, and spiritual. But when did like a trigger go off where you said, you know what? I not only want to be a successful businessman, but there's a scorecard, which, if you're in business and you're doing well, you're accumulating capital.
Yeah, this is fascinating. So I didn't think a lot of, so when I was 10 was really the entrepreneurial trigger was when I was 10. And then from the time basically 10 to 20, did all this experimentation, learned a ton. And probably when I was 12 or 13, I essentially became, I was kind of the bank to my siblings. So I would go and I would work, and I would, like, when I was 11, I think, I worked full time, 40 hours a week during the summer, made 40 cents an hour. The next year I got a 20% raise, right? 50 cents an hour. I thought I was like, big time. And, but I just didn't spend any money on anything. So I always had plenty of money. And so somewhere in there, and I always wanted to reinvest every penny. And I'm this way to this day. I would prefer to, anyway, we'll get to that later. Then it wasn't really about, and it's never been, by the way, it's never been about the output. It's never been like, I got to have a number and any of that stuff. I don't even like that thinking. I mean, for me, I don't like it. And it was all about creating something. And I didn't have the language at the time, but it was essentially about creating and delivering value every day for whatever customer set I was focused on.
And tell us I know you've been in a lot of different businesses, but from the age of 20 until you really got going with your own business, what were the different businesses that you learned from? Because I think you moved to different places in the country too, right?
Yep. So when I was 20, my brother and I started a parts business. I kind of fell in love with selling parts. When I was 20, I took all the money. I'd sold all my cattle and all my farm equipment, took the money of that. My mom helped me a little bit, by the way. Kind of shout out to mom. I bought a fourplex, bought a 4-unit apartment building. Kind of had this idea that I should buy one every year and basically build a real estate portfolio. Started working for my dad because he had airplanes and I wanted to fly airplanes.
For context, how many airplanes do you now have in your portfolio?
Yeah, rough order right now today, probably 140.
And they serve a global mission. We'll get into that later, but I just want to give context that, from where you started to where you are today.
Yeah. 140. But, when I started working for Dad in 1990, he probably he actually had a pretty good little fleet. He owned 15, 20 airplanes. And so that was what Mom and Dad created from 67 until I joined in 90. I'll talk about this later, but they created a foundation, ordinarily important foundation, that I made a choice later on to, rather than going and doing my own thing, I made a choice to kind of use that foundation as a springboard.
And what about your siblings?
Yeah. So I have one of each. I'm the youngest. My brother's 5 years my elder. My sister's 3 years my elder. My brother is the business that he and I started in 1990. He owns that business, and he's pretty entrepreneurial. He owns a couple other small businesses. It's all kind of in the aircraft. It's in aviation, so it's parts and some manufacturing. My sister, you'll appreciate this. We have a base in Panama. My sister is quite a graphic designer and a photographer, and she went to Panama in 1998, 1999. And our base manager at the time, who is now our chief pilot, she fell in love with him. And so she married one of our pilots, and he's now our chief pilot. So that's the connections.
Wow.
But neither of them are involved in the business.
So what would you tell your younger self if you had to write a letter with everything that you know now about the ups and downs of entrepreneurship and running a business, financial management, but particularly the ups and downs of running a business?
So number one is it's never as good as it seems, and number two is it's never as bad as it seems. That's first. Kind of call that number one. Number two is the only constant in life is change. Number three, if you're going to focus on, so mentoring self is a full-time job. And if you have goals, dreams, desires, hopes, and if the three things that you can do to increase the probability of those being successful is improve your verbal communication, improve the quality of your verbal communication, improve the quality of your written communication, and improve the quality of your ideas. So that's the third one. The fourth one is, and I'll end with this, the fourth one has to do with, I think we call it resilience now. Back in the day, Winston Churchill was never, never, never give up, or never, ever, ever give up. And
what I like from Winston Churchill is when he said, "If when you're in hell, keep walking."
Exactly. No, and so this is the if I were to like truncate all of that, it would be probably akin to hiking a 7-day through hike. And that is a 7-day through hike. You go through a pass. So all you see is the first mountain, right? You get to that, and then you get through the pass, and you look, and wow, there's another bunch of rows of mountains, right? Go down to the town, spend the night. So point is,
I don't know if you saw recently the new version of Alive came out, the rugby team from Uruguay that ended up in the mountains, and they basically
I've seen it.
Yeah, and the new one that came out, I mean the walk that guy had to do. I actually met him also. I was like, "Hey, you're not that hungry, are you?" But he's actually a very nice guy. But when you're talking about mountains, I was thinking about how like, but entrepreneurship is like that.
Yes.
And, you know, it gets easier when, like, okay, you got to come up with $5 million in the next 2 weeks or you're going to go out of business, which happened to me once when there was like a hurricane came by Florida and we lost the lights. And then the next day it's like, oops, we forgot to book this trade that, the regulators are going to shut us down if, and you live through that. And the next time it happens, you just say, you know what, this too shall pass. I just got to figure it
Exactly.
out.
Exactly. Yeah. Countless times, countless times of you get this like fear, this fight and flight mode of, oh my goodness, we're going to lose the business. And then, I mean, that's where that's the kind of, not the first place you go, but that's where the body
No,
goes, right?
no, you go. Like for me,
Right.
it's my stomach. Where is it for you when you get that fear?
Oh, shoulders. Yeah,
Shoulders.
shoulders.
Yeah. It hits you in
Yeah, yeah.
different places, but if you are in that feared, fight or flight, you're just not going to make good decisions.
And so typically, over the years, what I would do is, when that happens, is get the team together and basically say, guys, what's anyway. There's a whole process for this, but what was always a very important part of that process was then you go for a walk, or you go for a hike, or you go for a, or you go to the gym, or you go for a run, whatever. And typically that would then, for me, in my case, that would get me out of fight or flight completely, right? And deep into creative mode. And then you wake up the next morning and you got, okay, these are the 3 or 4 or 5 different options. Get the team together and execute.
Yeah. And I'd always ask myself, because I think I'm a powerful person and I don't like to be a victim or blame anybody. So I'd always say, what did I do that caused this to happen? I'm like, oh, there was a hurricane. Well, why don't I have a backup system? Why don't we like double check? Why don't we have a process to catch this? So you have to also, at least I put myself in that position, like, what did I do to create this? Or does God just have a sense of humor and he wants to like teach me something that I seem to not have learned yet? Humility is a good lesson too.
Yeah, this is a fascinating subject because the which we can talk more about this later. But the question is who's the source, right? And I don't mean the negative. I mean the positive, right? So who's the source of the words that I'm speaking? Who's the source of every idea? Who's the source of every dream? Every bit of favor? Like the fact that you and I got connected. Like, who's the source of that? Well, Charlie has changed my life. Every time I go down, we go through this one day like we did yesterday. I come back, I do a lot of work on it. I apply as much as I can. The outcome is remarkable. Who is the source of all the ideas that you had to create R360?
Right. Well, we the colors of R360 are black and white, right? So just to remind us that we are, a dual personality. And when you're connected into the heart and you're doing things from the spirit and the heart, it's very different than if you're operating from ego and fear and jealousy or whatever it is. Those decisions tend to be back. But I want to go back to intellectual capital, which is really your growth mindset. So you're in a situation where you didn't do well in high school, you struggled because of ADHD for community college. It just wasn't for you, but you figured out a way to hack the system, which I think is really cool. Which I'd love for you to talk about and what you got out of it and why it was important to you to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's see. We were granted a ton of favor from kind of call it 92 until call it 2000. Grew the business precipitously, grew the business significantly. And it was all gut. No frameworks, no financial frameworks, no operational frameworks. It was just focused today on creating a repeatable system that knocks the cover off the ball for the customer, and then do that over and over and over again.
Not, and I
And
just want to, you've mentioned this I don't want to lose it because everything that's coming out of your mouth isn't about how much money you're making. It's how you're providing value to a customer, to a client. You're
yes,
very value focused.
absolutely. It is every day. It's all about, look, you got to create value here and here and on a written document, right? Whether it's engineering, whether it's proposals, however, you got to create a plan, and then you got to deliver. And there's something in here, Charlie. This is a fascinating part where it's a form of giving. I don't view it as a form of generosity, but it's a way that you live out who you've been created to be, which is from the heart. How do I care for others? And our customers, a lot of the missions that we're on, they really matter. And there, a lot of them are dynamic in nature, where we may get retasked during the flight. And so you have to, in my opinion, or at least I've always believed this, that you have to build a relationship with the customer in a way where you really deeply understand not just what they're saying, but what their interests are. Like, what is their objective? And then you come together relationally, deeply relationally, and you iterate on building this repeatable model and then you make sure you make sure that you recruit and hire people with similar values, and then they go get it done. And man, when you do that, you grow a business. That's the input.
Describe the type of clients that you are dealing with. And obviously, as you grow, the composition may have changed, but just give us a flavor of who are these clients that are paying you for the services that you're providing with your aircraft?
Yeah. So think of defense, and then think of everybody else. We call it defense and civil. So defense would be, we've worked basically for U.S. DoD across all of the services. The mix changes from year to year, but we've got a lot of airplanes, a lot of customers there. We do surveillance and reconnaissance. It's actually called ISR, where for the customer, we collect intelligence via surveillance or reconnaissance.
So the natural question is like, well, why does the military need you? They got lots of airplanes, they have an air force. Why are they calling Mike Stoltzfus?
Yeah, because there's a whole litany of reasons. A lot of it has to do with when there's a threat that emerges, the S&T community, the science and technology community. So this is all science-based, right? We're just a truck, and I'm not diminishing what we're doing, but the issue is how do you get a sensor overhead something to collect some kind of data that you can then make a decision on? And so what we found kind of over the years is that, look, if it's 50 airplanes, then they're going to do it themselves. But if you get an engineer, what we call a 10-pound brain engineer, right? Really smart dude, who has an idea, there's a threat, he has an idea, and he then needs a platform to put that on, and he needs it right now. Like, he needs the airplane downrange in 5 months. That doesn't happen in the larger bureaucracy. And our entire system is built to respond, extraordinarily fast.
And you can do anything, right? So if they wanted to drop 1 million mosquitoes, or they wanted to move an elephant, or whatever, or they wanted to do a counter drug interdiction, you could figure out any of those missions very quickly. 5 months.
Completely. That's our system.
Got it. Okay. So going back to how you hacked the education and the growth mindset, which I thought was very unusual because people don't think about that the way you do.
Yeah. So by the late 90s, we bought 142 airplanes in about 24 months, levered up the balance sheet. We were a 2.77 debt to equity. Nuts. I had no idea. All I knew is we were generating cash for their customers, and the bank was happy to give us money. It's just nuts, Charlie. I had no idea what a balance sheet was. I had no idea what a P&L was. I had no idea what debt to equity was. I had no idea. None of this stuff. And so then we had 3 or 4 contracts that were putting off pretty good cash, and a whole bunch of costs changed, and our margin decreased dramatically. And so then, the bank comes calling. And so I'm like, well, shucks, what are we going to do? And so long story short, I got a couple buddies, one who graduated from Harvard undergrad and another buddy who went to business school in, 82, 83. And they both, separately, told me, like, you don't know what you don't know. you desperately need, like now, please, for the love of all that's right with the world, go now and get executive education at Harvard. Well, look, if I can tell you this, Charlie, I've not spoken with our other R360 members, but if you've not graduated from college, when you're in your 20s, you feel like you're a second-class citizen, okay? There's confidence issues, all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm not going to Harvard. They're way too smart. There's no way. And so I said, all right, finally. And then I was like, okay, fine. I'm going to do it. I went in 2001,
Tell
spring
us
of
about
2001. I went and did
what
a
is executive education and what program did you gravitate to?
Yeah, so executive education at Harvard, and most business schools have a component of this. It's actually quite profitable for the school. And Harvard Business School has multiple executive education programs. They've got an owner-managed group, which most of the work I've done is in owner-managed. And then they have a lot of other mid-level and senior level PE and publicly traded for folks that are in middle management, senior management, and they're across the board. They can be comprehensive management, they can be accounting, finance.
A very well-known program. What's the name? And
Yeah. So first one I did was a 1-week program called Strategic Finance for Smaller Businesses with Sam Hayes. He's amazing. And we took the information from that, brought it home, applied it to the business, and dramatically changed the business. When I was there, Sam said, you need to do OPM. And I'm like, Sam, I'm too young. I'm not bothered. I gave him all the reasons why I shouldn't. He said, no, you need to do OPM. So a year later, and OPM is owner, president, manager. You have to be president. You have to be, I was actually COO at the time, but you have to be president. You have to be some percentage of ownership. And I think there's a size of the business. I'm not sure.
And then how much time do you spend at Harvard, and what's the time commitment and the cost?
Yeah, so I go to OPM. It's a 3-year program, 3 weeks a year. And you're basically drinking from a fire hydrant 18 hours a day. You sleep 6 hours a night. And it changed my life.
But you're sitting around all similarly situated owners, I assume from all over the world, that you're learning from, right?
Yeah, there's 160 of us per cohort. They are anywhere, at the time we were a very small business. We had 120 employees, and up to guys that are second, third generation that have 5,000 employees, and everything in between. So, Charlie, it is like, if there's anything that we talk about, it depends on who your listeners are. If you have listeners who are in their 20s or 30s who are trying to figure out, how am I supposed to think? I want to change my thinking because I want to grow a business.
And explain, I don't think a lot of people know what the case study method is, and explain how you're actually learning from like real cases. And many times the professors are intimately aware. Sometimes they even bring the actual people involved that sometimes are famous CEOs that screwed something up, or sometimes they figured something out.
Yeah, no, we've had anyway. So when you do an executive education program at Harvard, you're basically going to learn 3 ways. The first one is from your own self-study. So you receive a case study and you read it, you do a bunch of notes. That's number 1. Number 2 is being with your peers. And with your peers, it might be something about a case, it might be something about your business, about their business, but just being with them and learning, and their peers. And then the third one is being in the classroom. And the classroom experience, when it's curated by a professor, these are Harvard Business School professors, right? These are the best in the world. And so what happens is, so specifically, is you're given a case. Let's say it's an accounting case, or let's say it's a marketing case.
And weren't you like scared going there the first time? Like,
well, the first time I went for the 1-week class.
Right.
And by the way, everyone, it doesn't matter what your background is. You could have a PhD. Everyone that goes to Harvard, the first day they're there, it's imposter syndrome.
Right.
No one believes they should be there.
Now they put you in a group, right? A small group, like a study group that you become friends with, and you break down the case. And I'm sure there's a science, behind that as well.
Yeah, there is. So So the basic idea is you receive a case, in advance. You read it, you study it in advance. The morning of the class, so you have 3 classes per day, sometimes 4, 3 classes per day, and so you then meet with your study group. Then they're like it's called a living group, and so 8 people. You go. Let's say you're going to do 3 cases that day. You spend 20 minutes and you go through the case together. And someone presents, but ultimately what you're doing is, with this small group, you're kind of experimenting with various ideas you have. You're kind of preparing to be in class. So you go through those, then you go to class. 140 people in a room. The single most important thing is, in the first 10 minutes, say one thing. Because then you're drawn into the conversation, and then 90 minutes total. 90 minutes later from the beginning, then the amount of learning, Charlie, that goes, the amount of learning that goes, because essentially what you're doing is you're taking the lessons from the case and you're processing what your current thinking is, what your assumptions are about life and your assumptions are about the business, and you're juxtaposing both of those, and usually 1 or 2 or 3 thing comes out of that where you change your thinking.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is, like, it could be something that has no relevance to your life or your company at that time, but like 5 years later, something comes up and something gets triggered in your mind. There was that case, and I remember what I'm not going to do because I remember those like 2 or 3 things, and then you have your notes, you go back. So this was very different than community college or high school. You were actually engaged, and it was fun, and it was applicable, and you had a group, and there was pressure because I guess you either called on or you had to raise your hand and participate.
Yeah, so you get cold called if you don't get in.
Right.
50% of the professors, they're going to cold call you. So the best thing you can do is get in early. But back to your point, what I found so fascinating was that at Harvard, and it is, by the way, Harvard Business School, that little part of the campus, it's like my academic home. It is a place where I found, extraordinarily smart, gifted professors who really wanted to invest into me. Developed a lot of friendships, and then I found it was a place where you're amongst your tribe. And I didn't necessarily feel like I was amongst my tribe at community college, but you hang out with a bunch of OPMers, and yeah.
My employees, my senior management team always hated when I went to these places because they were like, okay, what like shiny new idea is he going to bring back that he's going to be implementing that we're all going to have to learn?
It was so bad when I started.
Oh,
the guys
sure.
were like, please, not again.
But it was, I'm sure you were able to transform your business from a lot of things you learn. And but moving away from Harvard.
Let me say this. Let me say this. This part really matters. Yep. From 02, so I did the SFSB, Strategic Finance for Smaller Business, in 01. Did my first year of OPM in 02. From 02 to 2012. In 10 years, we grew the business 1,400%.
Wow.
Now, the question is why? Well, first of all, believe deeply that he's the source of everything. Now,
or she.
All boats. Pardon?
Or she.
Or she. Well, okay, you're right. Okay, all right, fine. So all boats rise with the rising tide. So we were granted favor, in my opinion. We were granted favor, and we got into these markets, into these defense markets that needed our services like now. So here's the difference. In the 90s, it was all gut, and the wheels came off. From 02 to 12, we then had frameworks. And not every day, but every week there would be an opportunity, there would be a decision, and our decision making. So my thinking my neurological pathways were changed because of OPM. And you could then draw upon those frameworks. And so that 1,400% growth was a whole ton of things. Timing's everything in life, right? whole ton of things. Without OPM, the wheels would have come off, in my opinion.
And let me, you're also a big believer, as I am, in terms of intellectual capital, about peer-to-peer learning. And there's, for CEOs, you have Vistage, you have YPO, EO, and you can sit around with a dozen similarly situated individuals, different businesses, and they have problems, and you help problem solve, and they help problem solve with you. They're not your board, so you can be a lot more open. Everything's confidential. But how helpful was that for you?
Yeah, so it's very important. So if you do the Clifton Strengths Finder, my number 3 is relator. And so being in relationship with peers, with friends, it's like how I'm wired. It's very, very important. So the OPM, I had a lot of friends out of OPM, but just out of OPM, I joined YPO. And me and a couple buddies, we were the founding members of our forum. We're still together. We're in a forum together. It's 21 years later. So the point is that the power of the YPO peer relationships, where every month you go and you do what's called forum, and you basically share what your problems are. The influence of those relationships that had on my thinking and on our business, it's not quantifiable. It's unquantifiable.
Right. And let me ask you, if you're mentoring a younger entrepreneur, are there any books that have been particularly helpful to you that you might say, hey, read these 2 or 3 books, or Good to Great? That's a classic. Tell us about Jim Collins' book, Good to Great.
Yeah, so this goes back to when I was 10 years old, 10, 11, 12. I had all these ideas, and I just simply had no words to articulate it. How you create value, how you deliver value, how you build a flywheel, like how do you the hedgehog concept, right? Figure out really what you're passionate about, and then do it over and over and over again, and have this repeatable process. I had no language for that. That's essentially what we did when I was in my 20s without any educational frameworks. I read this book I read Good to Great, Jim Collins, when I was probably 26, 27. And I'm like, oh my goodness, finally. Like, I'd never felt affirmed for all these crazy ideas. And I felt more affirmed by that book than any business book I've ever read.
Wow. So you would highly recommend that. Anything else you'd recommend?
Well, I've got a whole list. You can see over my shoulder. That's my favorite. That part's much more situational. It's almost like you'd have to say, well, this is the problem set. And then I could say, well, like crossing the chasm. That's if you're starting a new market, it's pretty important to understand the early majority, the early adopters, and then the early majority, late majority, things like that.
Right. I've always liked his Built to Last is one of my favorites also. Like,
this is
why companies fail,
Yeah. So no, Built to Last is good. And all the Lencioni books, they're really good. Patrick Lencioni, in my opinion, he's anyway. A lot of these
I'm
guys.
actually going to
Collins.
see. I was talking to Mark Moses this morning, and he's bringing Jim Collins to his conference on April 25th. So
I'll be there.
I haven't talked to him for 10 years, so I don't know what he's doing or what his latest books are, but he's always has something smart to say.
I will be there. I'll be at Mark's conference.
Awesome. Well,
so I'll get to meet one of my heroes.
Social capital is your brand in the community. You said you were a relator, but one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is one of the most important choices that you're going to make in your life that's going to help you in your professional career is who your life partner is going to be. So tell us a little bit how you see that and how you ended up with the life partner that you have right now.
So I'm desperately, madly in love with my wife. And I feel very loved by my wife. And so whenever I think about this topic, right, I always enter with immense amount of gratitude. And I recognize that what we have is very rare. It's not what my parents had, any of that stuff. And so,
And it's almost like your sister went to Panama to find someone, and you kind of ended up with someone from Brazil. So that Latin thing
yes,
is, you got
yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
going for
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So so my wife's Brazilian. So the quick story is that a buddy of mine who was a pastor of a church that I was attending, but we were good friends. He and I did a trip, and during that trip, I said, "Hey, it's that time in my life. I've got to find a wife." And because we'd been traveling internationally for a couple of days or for a few days, he was like, "Oh, I have the person for you." And so and that was when I was 30, 31, 32. We got married when I was 33. And so the kind of what led up to that was I got to a point where I'm in a small group. We've been together since 1999. And in those years, every time we would get together once a week, and the guys would pray for my wife. And that
Wow.
is Charlie.
You
Charlie, I have
manifested it.
no, really, 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 I have no
Usually
other
you have like
explanation.
a mother going to church praying for you, but in
Well,
this case,
no, it's like the same, right? It's
right,
like the
right.
same thing. Like this, that whole, there's a bit of a mystery in all of that, right? But what I do know is that there's some correlation between when folks are spending a lot of time praying and then the outcome. And so that's the only explanation I have for why I've been blessed with my bride.
And you
Now, to
have,
answer your question,
yes.
that's the preamble. To answer your question, Charlie, the impact on my ability to care for our customers and to care for our coworkers. We call them employees, but for me, they're like we work together. The impact of my bride who loves me and who listens to me when it hits the fan, right? You're like, how in the world are we going to get through
When
this?
your shoulders
Or
are heavy and you got the fear
oh,
running through you.
oh, and so it is not quantifiable, in my opinion. It is not quantifiable the impact that Melissa has had on me as a person, and then how that impacts how I show up and then care for our customers and coworkers.
Yeah, my wife still, she'll tell the story where my most important question was like, will you take me if I just have a shirt on my back? Because, you know, when someone comes from a professional background, her father was a doctor, all her siblings are professionals, accountants, lawyers, consultants. They don't understand, like, when you're in business, I've had like 5 businesses that have failed. Luckily, I had one that did really well, but one day you're up and one day, stuff happens that some is, part in your control, some isn't. But that was the hardest part in my relationship anyway, is the learning how to moderate those ups and downs and not bring it home. But did she come from an entrepreneurial family?
Well, entrepreneurial, but very, very. So she came from southern Brazil. Her mom was an entrepreneur. Her dad worked in a factory, and so extraordinarily humble beginnings, like really, really humble beginnings. And so but to your point, so we had this really extraordinary moment in 2012. We've gone through pretty big ups and downs, and
This is
it was
after you
at that
grew
point it
what,
was
1,400% or something by
yeah, yeah,
2012?
yeah, yeah. So 2012, and it was maybe closer to 2013. Simultaneously, by the way, when we were building that, I started an airline, and the airline failed. Like most airlines fail. So, but the airline failed, and because of that, there was a bunch of risk in our core business. And let's just say that there was a whole ton of risk that I might lose everything, everything.
And by this time you had children, I assume?
Now,
No,
let's see,
not yet.
2012. Yeah, yeah,
Not
yeah,
yet.
yeah. Gabriel was born in 06 and Luke was born in 09. And so we had let's say it was 2013-ish. And so I'm thinking, like I could see it in my mind's eye that literally we were going to start over. and we're going to lose everything. And I was going to rent a 2-bedroom apartment. And how was I going to start over? And fine, got to start over. And we're going to get at it, right? And then I'm like, well, I probably should tell Melissa.
Oh, I've
No
done one
kidding,
of
Charlie.
those. I've done
No
one
kidding.
of those.
No
Yeah.
kidding. We're standing. Our house in Harrisonburg, standing under the carport. I said, honey, I said, we might lose it all and we might have to start over. You'll never, I couldn't, blah. She says, okay, no problem. I'm with you. We'll do it. We'll do it together.
Brave man. Yeah. No, that is the way to do it, and that's the way to go. I had on one of mine where I was it was my company, but I was a major franchisee of a bigger company, and I had grown disenchanted. So I decided to tell my lawyer to give 90 days notice as per our contract. And my beautiful bride found out about 120 days later from somebody. But, you pivot and you make it happen. But yeah, but going back to social capital, now you're married. Social capital is also your relationships. Tell us how important your personal relationships are, how you make your relationships, how you network with people, and also your brand. Like, what is your brand, and how do you give back your time, your money to the things that are important to you and your family?
So I on a lot of these things, I tend to think opposite of the world. I show up.
You're a contrarian.
Yeah, a bit. Let's just say I think differently. And so most settings that I show up in, I show up from a standpoint of kind of what's the objective, and then who am I going to do this with? And then do everything I can do to help the people that I'm with. And it could be a word of encouragement. It could be an idea. It could be listening deeply, whatever it is. But ultimately then not what I try to do, what just happens naturally, by the way, is then these kind of images appear of what will highly likely unfold, or what could unfold, and then what's the probabilities that this will unfold. And then we just walk together. And so that doesn't matter whether that's business, whether it was, when we were in high school, the objective was to party like crazy, right? That's what we did. And so we did it together. And so that kind of construct is essentially how I show up. And so what that means is I essentially go where I'm sent. And, there is this idea, there's a lot of stuff in scripture around this. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that I don't want to follow me. Turns out that I'm a huge fan of Jesus, and I kind of want to follow Jesus. Well, what's that mean? That's a whole other discussion.
One of the books I dived into that somebody sent to me, and Abraham was called Shaddai to walk with me.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's like, all right, let's see where it takes them.
Okay, this is it.
So now there's 4 billion people on the planet call Abraham their forefather because he chose to go for a walk, basically.
He chose to follow.
Yeah.
Now, this is what's fascinating. There's a bunch of stuff in the Old Testament and a bunch of stuff in the New Testament outside of the Gospels around being called. Then there's a whole ton of stuff in the Gospels around being sent. And so whichever, right? It's kind of like two sides of the coin. And so somewhere along the line in all of this, what I realized is that I was following me too much. And then you study Jesus a bit, and he basically woke up every day and he would spend time in prayer with his Father, and then he would do that day whatever his Father told him to do. So he was following his Father, and he actually says this in John 15, I think. He only did whatever his Father asked him to do. And so the experiment that I'm kind of currently in the midst of is essentially trying to live the same way. And that is wake up and say and pray, spend some time in prayer, and listen, and then go that day wherever it is I'm supposed to go. Now, then the spirit of this, go ahead.
No, I'm a little different. I try to place my will. Um, you know, you talk about Jesus, and if you read the Bible, the only place that I see that Jesus gets just pissed off where he sends someone into the darkest corner of hell is in Matthew 25:14, where he tells the story of the master that has three servants, and he's taken off for a while, and he gives one 5 talents and one 2 talents and one talent, and the one with 5 he triples it, quadruples it, the one with 2 doubles it, but the other one buries it, and he was afraid and or lazy or whatever the case was. And the whole moral of the story is that you are given God-given gifts to use for yourself, your family, and your fellow man to make the world a better place. And if you don't use these gifts, if you don't do your dance, as I tell my kids, whether it's to be a school teacher, an entrepreneur, a doctor, who knows? But so I think it's, and I'm, it took me 50 years to figure that out. I went to, like you, to Harvard. I went to a class with Bill George, authentic leadership development, because of course I'm an authentic leader. And I found out, well, if you don't know your damn purpose and your why, what kind of leader are you? So my God, I had to hire a coach, and it took me about a year to be able to articulate and bring in my 3 God-given gifts, that I am here to inspire and connect others to achieve extraordinary things. I'm kind of a lamplighter, I kind of help. That's kind of who I am. And now I have a filter. And I was in YPO like you, and one of my YPO brothers came with an Excel with like 23 things I was doing. It's like, dude, there's no possible way. Everything that you're doing is like an onion with 50 layers. And there's no way that you're like on the 3rd level to achieve excellence. You got to peel down to like level 41, 42. It ain't happening at level 3 or 4. So, I think what you say is true, but I have a simple, the way I think about it, which is a little different than you, is I just say, God, you're the source of all abundance, and I pray that you work through my hands, you think through my mind, and you love through my heart. I want to be a vessel. I know what my dance is. I know I'm going to have ups and downs. I'm human. I got that black and white thing going. Hopefully there's more white and light. But you have a different approach, which I've never really heard, where you had shared with me one time that you basically say, hey, if this is my day and you want to take me, take my children, take anybody, I'm ready. That's really, Buddhist, I know if you're a committed Buddhist, you got to think 200 times a day on your death, because then you're going to live a purposeful life. But tell us about that and how that drives you.
Yeah, so I had long COVID for 3 years, and so I'll tell you what I learned through the long COVID experience. The basic idea is love, do, live, and give. And so love is love God and love others. Love, okay. Do, live, and give. So be, go, do, right?
Right.
When I was first working on this, I was like, oh, shucks, I got to be careful because I don't want it, right? Anyway, so love, do, live, and give. Love is love God and love others. A couple questions that I ask is, I won't go deep in it. I'll just give the high level. So love God and love others. Do is follow Jesus. Live is actively change my thinking. So it's, if my thinking is this way and it's either if it's wrong thinking, I want to turn to right thinking. If it's not wrong thinking, but it needs some tweaking, then I'll adjust. But ultimately the desire, so live is, I want to change my thinking. And then give is love, do, live, and give. Give is Give away everything every day.
So is it like not being attached to anything?
Yeah, so give is fascinating. So it's really a heart issue. So, you and I, we were dreamers. And so I give my dreams away. Sometimes I worry, right? I worry about the business. Well, I give my worrying away. We've been blessed with an extraordinary business. We've got, a ton of real estate, a ton of airplanes, awesome customers, awesome people, awesome processes. And I give those away. My wife and I live on a farm. I love my farm, like my favorite place on the planet. I give that away. So the point of giving it away is that, and again, it's in the heart, is rather than doing this, holding on, and you say it's mine, it's something that I control, and I'm going to control it. Control's just there's no truth in control. And rather than doing that, I wake up every morning and I do this. Lord, it's yours. You do with it whatever you want. I am sent to serve. I will serve you. And now, what's fascinating, well, you ask a couple more questions, and I'll get to the next part.
And you grew up in a Mennonite faith, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. So in Pennsylvania, but
Well,
we've gotten deep into, like, it is spiritual, but really I want to say it's emotional capital, because it's how, you've had a lot of painful disappointments in business and like, some people never recover. They just don't. And we talked about resilience, but you have a way to emotionally recalibrate and have this positive mental attitude. And if adversity strikes, it's like you already gave it away, right?
this is much easier now. We've basically we've entered into 65 new markets over the history of the company, and since 1990, almost all of those.
And that includes international, obviously.
Yeah, but again, this is not contracts. This is just new markets, new market segments.
Got it. Okay.
And we only we only have a batting average of 70%, which, so 70% on 65, right? And I basically led all the failures. The tens of millions of dollars of capital that I've destroyed, right, is just, fortunately, again, I don't believe I'm the source of any of this. Fortunately, I was given the I don't know, ability, or I just went through a forgiveness process, right? Forgave myself. I did a lot of learning from each one of them. And
How do
what
you
are
deal
lessons
with,
learned?
when you blow through that kind of money, there's always people involved in businesses. And how do you deal with the guilt or whatever it is when you're like, hey, I have 300 employees, and if I don't get down to 150, I'm going to be bankrupt and out of business. And if I want to save it for those 150, I'm going to have to get rid of 150. How do you deal with that? Because that's a tough thing that entrepreneurs.
Those are just the realities of business. At our peak, we were 850. First dip, we went down to 500, went back to 750, went down to 500. Now we're back up to something over 600. And I started an airline and did 2 layoffs. First layoff was 50, second was 50. And I felt like completely responsible for the fact that these are people that built an airline together, and now I had to lay them off. In 2 weeks, everyone was reemployed.
So that's what you find. I remember I stressed out about this one chief operating officer. I'll never forget. The business had just outgrown him, but he had been there since the beginning. And then he went through some emotional stuff. He was just not the right person. And like you said, I think it was within 60 days, he was in the right place, and our business just took off because he was an anchor. But that's a little bit different than when all of a sudden something happens in the environment that you have to go in and lay off a good portion of good people. But like you said, it's business. Once it's happened 2 or 3 times, it sucks, but you just have to do it. I want to go back to human
Let me say
capital.
something about that one.
Yeah.
Though. Let me say something
Go.
about that one. So I do believe. So it is painful. It is painful for everyone involved. And what I've found is that we basically have one goal, and that is and again you could parse this one out, but suffice it to say we just simply have to love, be patient, be kind, don't envy or boast, all that stuff. You have to love the team. You have to walk with the team through the process. And what I've found, and it's all truth all the time, and it's good news fast, bad news faster. And so when you apply those three ideas, love and then the other two, and
Tell
you
us
walk
about the
together,
bad news part.
pardon?
Tell us about the bad news part.
Yes, sir. Good news fast, bad news. People just want transparency. They don't want, like, just tell me what it is, and like, if you tell me what the truth is, then I'll figure out how to deal with it. But if you're trying to hide something from me, then I don't know really what's going on. And so, good news fast, bad news faster is that, look, if we get a contract, let the team know. But if something like really bad happens, like let's say in this case a huge contract goes away, immediately tell your team immediately. Now the world has changed, and don't assume that the business that you had before the contract went away is the business that you have now. It doesn't. It's now a different business, and you have to take immediate action. Anyway, point of that is that point of the whole part of that story is that what I've found is that it is the process. When you go through that part of the curve, the process by which you do this can be done in a loving way, with respect, with care, and ultimately people come out of the other side, even often strengthened, because now there's something that's ending that they can go have a new beginning.
Yeah, and you have to have the transparency, otherwise, you're dead on arrival. That's super, super important. Now, it's hard to maximize your human potential um, if you don't take care of yourself, your body, your nutrition, your exercise, when your batteries are low, to go do things that fill them up, and not only you, but your family, your spouse. How do you think about that um, in terms of nutrition, exercise? I know that you're known for long, quiet walking retreats and mountains all over. Tell us about all of that.
Yeah, so that one I can't tell you that I have. I'll tell you the model, but that one, what I've found over the years is that there are seasons where I'm stronger, and there's seasons where I'm weaker. And when I say weaker, I'm not as disciplined, or the cadence, where the cadence adjusts. And so so I've actually hired a coach. I've hired a coach, basically a health coach, for all things health. And that's one of the things that I'm now in the midst of working on. But the basic idea is, and we all know this, right? It's just simply intake. It's calories, and it's quality of calories. And then it is the movement of the body, whether it's aerobic or whether it's strength. Now, the way that I back in the day, I did CrossFit a lot, and before that I was a runner, and then I had long COVID, and I couldn't move. Right, I could walk to the couch, and that's it for 3 years, and was very, very not out of shape, but I mean I was out of shape, and so a pulmonologist at the Cleveland Clinic basically said, you need to go, you just need to start hiking. And so I started hiking, and it turned out to be, it's extraordinary. So it's good for the soul, it's good for strength, it's good for cardio. And so I highly recommend it. What I do is 2 or 3 weeks a year, I will take a 5-day or a 6-day, and I will go somewhere in the world, and I will do a solo 6-day hike. I average probably 10 hours a day. It's anywhere from 7 to 13 hours.
And where are some of the places you've done this?
So Brazil, my wife's Brazilian. I've done a handful in Brazil. And then I've done, and the ones in Brazil were actually not solo hikes, they were with friends. And then I've done a bunch of solo hikes in Switzerland, the Alps, the way that the Swiss mark their trails and the way that everything's organized is world class. And anyway, so Switzerland by far is my favorite place. And but the key in this, specifically as it has to do with sustained longevity, hiking 4 times a year is not the solution. Doing some form, 18 minutes, 20 minutes of walking, running, whatever, half an hour, 45 minutes, whatever, a day, plus strength 2 or 3 times a week, that's like table stakes. And that's where I'm not quite as strong right now. And then like the icing on the cake is these 3 or 4 times a year, or 2 or 3 times a year, doing these 5-day hikes.
And when you go hiking for 10 hours, are you manifesting? Are you thinking about nothing? Are you just appreciating the beauty of nature?
Yeah, it's amazing.
Have any agenda?
So my agenda is to listen. And so it's a combo, and it's really in the moment. I may pray, I may listen to podcasts, I may just give room for whatever emerges. And the fascinating thing is that, as a rule, pretty cool stuff happens after 3 or 4 hours, but the gold usually doesn't show up before 7 or 8 hours. And so a 12 or 13 hour hike, what emerges is all the noise, all the chaff, all the stuff that doesn't matter, it kind of falls away. And then something like really important, how to think, or something to focus on, or something to solve, or something to
Do you carry a journal with you if you have like a brilliant idea?
Yeah, I do a lot of journaling. Typically when I'm on a hike, I journal every day. And so typically on a hike, I will journal either that night, depending on how tired I am, or the next morning. And so it is utterly fascinating where I may go on a 5-day trip, and I think there's probably 2 or 3 things that I'm going to solve. And then on day 2, something out of the blue. And there's a mystery, this little mystical, not for me, not mystical, but it's a mystery, right? Something out of the blue emerges. Now, what happens is, and I don't know the physiology of this, I do know that there are, I don't know what all the chemicals are, but you're on a hike. The first half of that hike, if you're doing mountain passes, is you're beating 130 beats a minute.
Yeah, well, I was in LA last week, and I learned something I didn't know, that when you have movement, it connects the right part of your brain, and it activates a creative state. Just that movement opens up this out of the box kind of creative, intuitive sense, and it's like, hey, you need movement. And when you do extended movement like you're doing, that's a whole different thing. I don't like hiking only because it reminds me of forced marches in the military. I'd rather go surfing. But what I do love about hiking is just the beauty of the beauty of it all when you're in the mountains, especially.
This is what happens. Again, I should learn this at some point. There's this combo. There's a combo of being in the woods, of having these beautiful vistas, of having different elevation rise, or different angles, different 100%. Heartbeats.
The eyes are very important.
There's all this combination going on, and the beauty of the landscape. There's the senses. All of the senses are like incoming. And what that does to the creative part, I don't know. Physiologically, I don't know how it works. What I do know is what happens. and that is the stuff that emerges, and then your ability to work on it is just there's no comparison.
So what does your wife and boys say? Like, hey, Dad, most people just, take a cold shower or a hot shower and they have ideas in the morning. It's like Dad's taking off on one of his 4 trips to, hike in the mountains for so many days.
I should ask them.
Do you go with like a walking stick and all that stuff?
No. I have sticks, right? And I've got a whole setup. I mean, I got a backpack and all that stuff.
And altitude also. You're in a pretty high altitude, right? In Switzerland?
Yeah. So in Switzerland, you'll go through 12, 13,000 foot passes. Most of them are 9 or 10, and you'll start out 5 or 6,000 feet. So no, I've really only felt blessed. Now, of course, we miss one another.
Daniela, she's who we were with yesterday. She's going with her husband in May for the second time in a row to Spain to walk that Compostela.
Yeah, the Camino.
Yeah, the Camino de
It's called the Camino.
Compostela.
Yeah, the Camino de Santiago de Compostela.
Right. So she's training now. She trains with equipment. Her neighbors wonder like what, but it's pretty intense, I guess.
Yeah. I did 5 days of that last spring, and I think the longest hike I did was 68 kilometers in one day.
Wow.
Which is, I don't know what that is, something like 40 miles or so.
Tell us, being an entrepreneur with all the ups and downs, the importance of your spiritual life for you, for your spouse, your kids, and how it has contributed to your success, and also your giving of your time and the charitable causes that you support and the things that you're involved in from a time standpoint as well.
So, well, first, the purpose really matters. Throughout my life, I had times where I thought my purpose was to build businesses. I thought my purpose was to build an airline. It always had something to do with, there was one point where I thought my purpose was to give money away. And what my experience was that all of these things became idols. And I would put the business building or the airline building or the giving money away, I would put those idols between me and relationships, or I would put it ahead of relationships. They would be more important than relationships. And so I ended up with a kind of a trail of broken relationships. And somewhere along the line, I realized that that's just not how I want to do life. And so there has to be a way that I can figure out purpose, because the purposes that I have are failing, right? And so a buddy of mine, a mentor of mine named Doug Coe, he walked me through, like Bill George did with you, he walked me through, we spent a lot of time together for a year. And I came out of that with my own purpose, which is love God and love my neighbor. And so that's ahead of everything else. And so, now, by the way, I did not come up with that. So it turns out that there's a piece in Deuteronomy, right? Then there's a couple of places where Jesus talks about this. This is a timeless idea. This idea of love God and love your neighbor is not just, it's amongst multiple religions. So this is not an original idea, but it is something that I've deeply believed in for a long time. I thought was important, but I didn't know that ultimately that it was my purpose. So you take that. So that's the first one. Then the second one is somewhere along the line, very early, probably when I was 21, 22, I had this really strong sense that I was supposed to just give to people, financially, give to people that needed help. And so I started giving, and crazy thing happens, by the way. You never give to get, but there is this thing called the law of the harvest, right? It's not the idea of the harvest, it's the law of the harvest. And that is that we all will reap what we sow.
Karma.
And so there's a thing called, in Romans 12, there's a thing called gift of giving. There's a bunch of gifts of the Spirit. And there's a thing called gift of giving. And it turns out that I did a assessment on this. Turns out that I had the gift of giving. And by the time I was 27, I bought into this idea that I should do reverse tithing, right? So I was giving 90% away.
Tell us about that. Wait. Please slow down, back up. Let's back up this tape. So you came up with this that you should give away 90%. And when did you get that idea, and for how long did you do that?
Yeah. So probably when I was 26, 27. And the idea actually came from a book called Mover of Men and Mountains, I think. It was a story of R.G. Letourneau. He was an engineer, started a university down in East Texas, down in Longview, Texas. He did the reverse tithing thing.
This is worse than living in
So
California,
I basically,
right? Where
pardon?
you're giving it's worse than living in California, where you're giving 50% away
No,
on taxes.
exactly.
So you're taking 90% of your disposable income, your take home.
Huh. Yeah. So a lot of this was it's listening to the still small voice. And so if the still small voice, if I would be in a room where somebody was trying to raise money for something, whether it was, building schools or caring for orphans or supporting the translation of the scriptures, those are examples. Supporting radio programs, various things that I was doing that. So in scripture, there's this is a 30, 60-fold, 100-fold servant. And the 100-fold servant is the person essentially who, when the Spirit, you can use any way you think. You can think about the Holy Spirit, you can think about your gut, you can think about your conscience. What we all know is that there are voices, and we know when that voice is the right thing to do, and we know when that voice is not the right thing to do, right? Like sometimes we pay attention to the voice and we're doing something we know we shouldn't be doing it. And so in my experience, I kind of chalked it up to the Holy Spirit. And so whenever I would get this feeling, so the 30, 60, 100-fold is the guy that's a 100-fold servant is the one that does what the Spirit asks him to do immediately. Like Abraham taking Isaac up on the Temple Mount. Or like Mary rather, saying,
Lord, whatever you yes want. To everything. Yes to the universe.
Yes,
if
right.
Something presented itself where you could be a helping hand and you had the disposable income, you would put it towards whatever it happened to be.
But I would only pay attention to the still small voice. Sometimes I hear stuff and I'm like, boy, I'd love to be involved in that. And then the still small voice says, nope, you're not. It's not for you. And this happens to this day. Happened yesterday. And so the point is, but when I was 26 or 27, remember when I was a kid, when I was 10, 11, 12, all I did was I made money and I didn't spend anything. So when I was 26, 27, I could live for $1,000 a month. Now, I didn't own a house. I was cheap. I could live on nothing. And so, giving 90% was easy. So go ahead. So that's, you mean to tell more, or you want to?
Yeah. But there was there an expectation that I am being so generous that the world's going to be generous to me in return, so I can continue giving away 90%?
Yeah.
Or
utterly fascinating. So when I was 22, I started giving, and from the time I was 22 to 25, I was giving as much as I could. I didn't have a percent, right? I just gave as much as I could. And Charlie, you can't imagine. I mean, you got to realize I'm a community college dropout from rural Virginia. And the amount of bonusing and the amount of opportunities and the amount of deals, it was nuts, the amount of revenue that was coming towards me. And so, yeah, there was a correlation, but I didn't think very much about it. Then when I was, again, I don't know how old I was, 26, 27, 25, somewhere in there. I didn't give for a year. And it's not because and I was doing some things I probably shouldn't have been doing. All hell broke loose. And I'm praying, I'm like, Lord, what in the world? I drank a lot and all that stuff. I'm like, Lord, what in the world's going on? And finally, somehow I realized there was a correlation that there is a correlation between how life comes at me with regards to whether I'm living out my gift of giving or not. And so I was like, okay, well, fine, I'll start giving again. And it was
That's,
And but it wasn't like, okay, fine, I'll start giving again so I can get, so it'll fix it. It was just more of this strong sense of I need to be who I am, and who I am is exercising my gift of giving. So things turn around in 6 months, all's well, and then somewhere along the line in there, a year or two later, somewhere I don't know how many months, my brother-in-law gives me my friend at the time, who became my brother-in-law, gives me this book about R.G. Letourneau, and about R.G. Letourneau doing 90%, doing a reverse tithe. And I thought, well, that's a great idea. I love kind of extreme ideas, right? Well, let's try it. Charlie, you can't imagine. Like my dad basically comes to me and says, hey, this is like a year later. My dad comes to me and says, hey, you basically generated a ton of cash, and the reason why we're able to do what we're doing is because of what you did, and therefore I think you should be a business partner. Do you want to be a business partner? And by the way, that was when I made a choice, because I had a choice right there. I was either going to go start on my own, or I was going to use the foundation that he built, and that's where I made the choice to use this foundation. And that was not in his nature at all to like give away a huge chunk of the business to one of his kids. And that's one example of innumerable examples of what was going on in my life.
All right, one of the things you said, or that struck me, is I always believe that the world is not coming at me, it's coming from within me.
Mm-hmm.
And when things happen in my life, is why I say, well, what am I doing that, behind me, that kind of painting on the wall comes from Exodus, when Moses parts the Red Sea, and God saved me. So I gave you the word, I gave you the staff, and you now need to use the tools that I gave you. So there's a combination, the mystical part of the Hebrews and the Jewish faith have 72 names of God. It's the only place in the Bible where there's an equal amount of stanzas. And I meditate every morning. I have a deck of cards, and I just pick one up. I look at it, and it's qualities, mercy, compassion, kindness, not having, jealousy in your life, things like that. And I try to bring that one aspect into my life. And we all have divinity within us, because we're all one, I believe, anyways. That just trying to be the lighter part and not the darker part. I always say, if it's an 80% light day, it's a good day. Going back to what you said about loving, was it loving God, loving others? What was
Yeah. So the scripture
neighbor?
is love the Lord God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbors yourself. But that's like, so the simple is love God and love your neighbor.
So with all peace and love, I will tell you, there's one person that's missing. Now, you started this when you talked about your lovely bride, that you love her and you feel loved every day. But there's a lot of people in the world that don't love themselves. And I always say it's like three things, right? Love God, love yourself, love others. And not loving yourself isn't like a narcissistic thing, but you're not kind to yourself, you beat yourself up, imposter syndrome, I'm not good enough, blah, 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 blah. I was watching last night, I've been watching this series, really good series. It was the last one of David. It's on Prime. And yesterday, they hook you with like 3 episodes, and then you got to watch week by week by week. And yesterday was the final episode where David faces this giant Goliath, and it's a freaking, and we all have our Goliaths to face, but some of the Goliaths are, we did something that we're ashamed of, or something's going on that you don't love yourself, which is a problem because you're a child of God too. So it means you're not loving your closest neighbor, which is yourself. And it's hard, if you don't love yourself, to, love others, love your children, love your wife, all that kind of stuff. And then the other thing that you mentioned, there's in the Old Testament, Numbers 25:6, it's about worshiping idols. And it's really more of a parable of, hey, politics can be an idol. Your phone can be an idol. Your anything that you really just do in excess can become something that takes you away from a very simple, you know, in R360, we have every religion, represented. We have individuals that aren't people of faith either. But, loving something bigger than yourself, loving yourself and loving others, it's like we mentioned about losing weight. And there is literally 200 or 300,000 books on diets. And all you got to do is eat less and exercise. It's a pretty simple thing, but we complicate it. And, there's a lot of spiritual people. There's people that organized religion is good for. But I think at the end of the day, if you can just focus on those three things, and it's hard enough, just like losing weight, it's a discipline, right? I thought forever until yesterday that a habit was 21 days. And lo and behold, I figured out it's 66 days to form a habit. I got to chat GPT that, but that's what he said. Did you know that? That it takes
No, so I thought it was
days?
63. I thought it was 21 times 3. That's what a buddy of mine told me a couple years ago. But regardless, 63, 66. It's I do buy into the idea. Not 21.
Yeah, a few months. I thought it was 21. But so I interrupt. So back to your faith has been obviously very important, but wrapping everything up, advice that you would give others that want to lead a purposeful life, impactful. They want to have freedom, which comes through financial wealth, whether it's 100,000, a million, 100 million, it doesn't, matter. But what lessons have you learned the hard way that you can, tell some of the listeners if they want to go on this path that you've been on?
Yeah. I think, well, first of all, spending time on purpose is time well spent. Anything that in our purpose that has to do, if our purpose has to do, if it's more about me than about others, try it, but I'm not suggesting it's going to work.
No. And I made that mistake a long time ago. I wrote a book, and the whole book was that passion was the end all and be all. And what I discovered later is that passion are things that give you energy and they fuel you to live your purpose. And look, passion could be being with your children, your grandkids, having a barbecue with friends, traveling, reading a book, listening to music. But it fills your battery. But purpose is always about using your gifts to help others, whatever that may. It could be helping your family.
Mm-hmm.
But it is somebody beyond yourself. It's not the I.
Right. So that's so number one, if I were going to, like, my counsel, certainly based on my own, experiences, number one is purpose, time on it, but do it. It's about others. So that's number one. Number two, fascinating. And that is mentoring self as a full-time job.
Wow. I love that. On this screen, you can't see it, but what it says, leading yourself and inspiring others to live a 3 Sigma life. But it's a word I created, leading yourself. You just said it's a full-time job.
Full-time job.
Well, my wife says she has another child, so for her it's another child. But she has her like angry parent on. Only when I
we
screw
learned
up.
About that.
Yeah.
So the third thing I would say probably has to do. So this would go back to. So a buddy of mine, he says, "Love God and love others." Well, you and I, like, I'm part of others. So God, everybody else, and I fit in everybody else. And so there's by the way, all through this, purpose, love, it doesn't hurt if it's in there somewhere. Mentoring self, Doesn't hurt if it's in there somewhere.
You have two amazing boys, and no one teaches us how to be a parent. I'd love to get some advice around that for
Oh, yeah.
individuals.
Yeah.
But
So here's what we learned. So when Gabriel was 3 or 4, he's 18 now. When he was 3 or 4, he would bump his head or bump something, and he'd start crying. And I'm like, dude, what gives? So what? You're fine. Brush yourself off. Go get it done, man. You're fine. Well, that was just like 180 out. That was not the right thing to do. So Melissa and I did some learning on this, and we found out that the single most important thing for kids is to kids, meaning probably preteen or at least into teens as well, is just simply to nurture them. And so what does it mean to nurture them? It means that if they bump their toe, it means to express empathy and then to listen, to sit and listen or walk and listen, whatever, but to basically understand whatever it is and then play the adult. You're not learning about this yet, just to play the adult. And 3 or 4 minutes later, they're fine. Well, that nurturing, the power of that nurturing, the protection, the strengthening of that nurturing, what Melissa and I have observed with the boys, they are wonderful young men, Charlie. Wonderful. Gabriel is becoming a man before our eyes. Is that nurturing alone, again, it's rooted in love, probably did more for their confidence, for their protection, for their trajectory, ultimately for the way they love others, for the way that for their own work ethic. They both work their tails off. This whole combo, that's what I would say. It is the objective is love. My objective is to love my boys unconditionally. That's all good and well until conditions present themselves. Once conditions presents themselves, then what do? Then what we have done is we go to nurture. I'll give you one more piece. Very early on, we decided that we were going to we were going to have this framework where they were going to be responsible for their own actions and for the consequences of those actions. We started that when they were 2.
wow.
And to this day, that's how they live. And they know that they're responsible for both, for the action and for the consequences. That would be my summation.
Super important. I learned, I had a interesting upbringing when you have a father who's a doctor, and it's like their way or the highway. And I just developed this thing in my life. I've made all these choices, and sometimes they've been good choices, sometimes they've been bad, but even the choices that I have studied the heck out of, looked at all the pros, all the cons, and make a choice, end up being the wrong choice, but the wrong choice leads me to somewhere that leads me to where I am at today. So what I decided with my kids is say, look, I got my own life. You got your own life. Anything that you want to do, if you want my blessing, tell me what you want to do and articulate all the positives and all the negatives and decisions. And let me ask questions. That's it. Now, if you want my opinion, you can ask it and I'll give it to you. But number one, you don't have to ask for it. And number two, if I give you an opinion, you don't have to follow it. And the reason is I don't want you to do something and say, well, I did this because I followed what Dad said. I want them to come up with their own decisions, know that with all the thoughtful rationale, it still may be the bad decision, but even that may lead them somewhere that they need to go. So they end up not having a lot of fear, they're adventurous, and they end up asking you for your thought process because you're not going to be judgmental. And whatever they're going to do, it's like, hey, obviously they're not going to do, you teach them good values. They're not going to do stupid things, but whatever it is that they want to do, if I ask questions and it seems like it's well thought out, Yeah, that's their journey, not mine. I'm on my own crazy journey.
I fully affirm this. If you go back to those 65 market starts and the 30%, the capital that was destroyed in those 30% definitely generated at least 4x of what was lost.
Wow.
And so if my boys, or if like the colloquially, if we don't give our children, I'll make it personal, if I don't, Melissa and I don't give our boys the opportunity to go through their own process, make their decision, and then the power of what the world calls failure, I call it learning, then essentially, if I don't let them do it, I'm robbing them. I'm stealing. It's theft. I'm taking away from them something that could a personal lesson that will highly likely change their trajectory of their life. So I fully affirm what you said.
Oh, yeah. And we haven't, you went to OPM, you talked about that, and I thought it was amazing that you decided to go back for a second time with new classmates, learn, new case studies and you, me, and individuals that are on our entrepreneurial trajectory were gifted this just inordinate amount of drive. And it comes from a lot of different places. A lot of times it comes from things that may have happened in our childhood that perhaps weren't healthy, and fears that maybe it's just innate. But I always have to kind of moderate now in my older age that, I think one of my kids said, Dad, some people look at you and they think like you're a machine. You have to like, wow, am I that strange or different? But then you talk to your those closest to you, like your wife's like, yeah. So you have to have that empathy that, you know, you're 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 built a certain way. Not everybody's built that way. And that's kind of been a tough thing for me. And also you want things done a certain way. And being able to moderate your frustrations when things aren't going to certain ways or to your very high standards is a constant struggle. I may have to go on those 5 or 10 day walks. I have a 25-mile beach now, so I can just go downstairs in Daytona and just walk. So I need to do more of that.
I think there's a really a key on what you just what you just said, and that is that we'll just go back to mentoring self. And if in fact I want to love, the question is love is the first thing is love is patient. And oftentimes what happens is when because I've got, an inordinate amount of energy like you do. And I think I view it through the lens of it's DNA, right? It's just it's what's within me, and it just never goes away. And so the struggle is, how in the world do I live out who I am, which is let's get it done now, and it's so clear. But then how do I love those around me, and how am I patient with them who might need a little bit more time?
Yeah. And also, when you think about purpose, you have your purpose directing to helping others, but you also have a duty and a responsibility. So I am a husband, I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm a father, I'm a friend. And in those realms, if you're so busy living your purpose, it becomes an idol. It becomes, your purpose takes you away from those that you love, and you're not showing them and investing I say we're merchants of time at R360. And the only thing that those around us who love us want is our time and our presence and our mind not being in 100 different places, to give them space to share and listen and fellowship and things like that. So that's been a very hard lesson for me, one that I'm still working on.
This is why I concluded on putting love God and love others ahead of building businesses, ahead of giving money away. Because when I was doing that, when I would put building businesses ahead of love God and love others, then those that were around me that need my love, that need my patience, need my kindness, that I wasn't giving it to them because I was prioritizing that second ahead of building the business.
Yeah, and we talked about giving everything away, and the first member to die in R360 was in my YPO forum. He was the one that came with the spreadsheet and said, "You're doing these 23 things." Alberto Daire. He was 53 years old. He was playing basketball with his brother and his son Sebastian, and had a massive heart attack. And you just never know when your time is up. So you really have to, one of the best there's 3 or 4 books in my life that I picked up like at 2 in the afternoon. I start reading and I'll stop at 2 in the morning. And one was called Chasing Daylight. And it was written like 2007, 8. And it was the CEO of KPMG. And he was just a hard charger. And he goes in for a brain scan. He had a migraine and he was off to a conference, and the doctor said no. And he had an inoperable brain tumor and given 6 months to live. And he found that he was spending most of the time with people in this outer ring, and the people that he was closest to that he loved, he spent the less time with. And instead of doing chemo and poisoning himself to live another 2 or 3 months, he decided to meditate, to live presently, to meet with everybody he loved, say goodbye. And the last chapter of the book is written by his wife, and that had a huge effect on me. Like, oh my God, that it could be any one of us. So you got to be really careful with that. And then when you have grandchildren, it has a different effect on you. That's like, oh my gosh, there's these humans that have my characteristics and follow me. I was in Boulder, and I remember this little thing. There was like 30 people in the room, but this thing just kept following me. Like, well, how does that happen? Is there like an antenna or something? But yeah, it's so anyway, those, and I hark back to my grandfather, who I would spend the summers here in Daytona, and we'd go for walks on the beach. He taught me how to drive, how to fly fish, and I am who I am today because those lessons too that you get from your grandparents. So I want to ask you, is there anything I haven't asked you that I should have asked you that you'd like to answer for our guest today?
So, well, first of all, by the way, my granddaddy, my mom's side, he passed when I was 6. I knew him I have vivid memories of being with him when I was 4, 5, 6. Charlie, he loved me unconditionally.
Yeah. That's probably what they feel, because we can give them back, and we're not like transactional or scolding them or whatever the case is. That's probably it. Yeah.
He was phenomenal. Okay. So here's what I would offer. For those of us who are very driven, or for those of us who are very analytical, for those of us who are very goal oriented, it's very easy to make all of this about the destination. And the fight, the maturity, what I've found is to go from this being about the destination to being about the journey. And so what that means is living in the moment and being fully present, right? You and I have just had a delightful conversation. And I have felt like I've been in the moment with you the whole time. And when I got a call that starts here in a few minutes, or it's actually started a minute ago, so I'll be there in a bit. When I'm there, I will be fully in the moment. And so as for the listener, I can't tell you if you are focused on the destination. I can't tell you how to get there. What I can tell you is that if you mentor self, stop trying to, mentor everybody else. If you focus on mentoring self, and if you have a desire to find, it just doesn't feel like there's truth in next week and next year, but there's a lot of truth in today. And truth might be the wrong word, right? But there's something that those other things can be distractions. And so that I would say, so the summation would be, if you have a desire to enjoy the journey, there's a way to do that. But I think for you individually, you're going to have to go about it and give it time, and eventually you'll figure it out.
Yeah. I think, the mistake I did as a parent was I was like, you kind of become your parent, you model behavior. So in my head, it's like, look, if I live my life and I work hard and I'm a provider and da 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 da, it's enough to just be the role model. That's your job. But then when I asked my 4 kids, what have I done well as a father and what are opportunities to do better with you? It's like the whole thing was time. Like, hey, when was the last time we did something together? You're so busy, blah, 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 being and doing all these things for others. And all they were doing, my wife too, is just fighting for my time. So I had to change that whole thought process. No. And like, you put it a different way, that journey is being present every day for the people that you love. And if your head is in the business or in the nonprofits or whatever these other idols that you've created, then you're losing the whole thing, So, well, Mike, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I really enjoyed our conversation. I feel blessed to have you in my life and to be part of the fortunate fishes. So as a believer of Jesus, you are following someone who was, fishes was very important to the fisherman, who was a fisherman of men.
Exactly.
So thank you for all you do, and I feel blessed to have you in my life.
Thank you, Charlie. Charlie, same to you. Your heart, your willingness to listen to your inner voice, and then your willingness to bring friends together. And I say curate, but it really is to allow for an experience to emerge that ultimately is life-changing, is what I am the beneficiary of.
I love color. So when you get a lot of colorful people that are willing to share their colorful stories, you never know what's going to pop out. So thank you very much for coming today.
Bless you, Charlie.
And
Thank you for the time.